The following is a production of Salt and Light Radio in Boise, Idaho. Kick off your work boots and pull up a boulder. It's time for Man Cave, discussing the issues that affect Catholic men in today's culture. Grab your favorite beverage, pick out a comfy spot around the campfire, and enjoy today's conversation with our two favorite cavemen, Pat King and Brian Howe.
Hello, I'm Pat King and the host of the Man Cave Radio Live program on Morning Light, and sitting next to me is my co-host,
Eddie Trask.
What's your name again?
Yeah, I'm Eddie.
Yeah, he just met up his first time, so.
Yeah.
So, we have a live radio show where we have about 15 minute conversation, depending on when
I thought you were going to say 10 or 15 listeners, but go ahead.
Well, I thought there was more than that.
Maybe 16? 16 17 now. Yeah.
Anyway, so we do a live show once a week on our Morning Light show on Salt and Light Radio in Boise, and we do this show, but Eddie and I have these conversations usually before while we're waiting in the Blue Room to come on, and then sometimes we'll meet and talk afterwards, because 15 minutes really isn't long enough to really get into any depth. And today on our live show, we talked about manhood, fatherhood responsibility. Words mean stuff, means particular things, how to keep that the strength of the role of the man in the family in the right order, and then the fact that it's been deemed by God himself that we should have one, it takes man and woman to procreate and produce a child, but two, the father has a certain role in the family, and the mother has a certain role. Not that they're like, okay, you can't cross that boundary and you can't cross that. It's that there's the strength behind a man and the tender nurturing behind the woman makes a family. It makes it cohesive and it makes it strong. And in today's society, we're not doing a very good job of that. Divorce is at a 50% rate. Little less in the Catholic Church, Catholic families, Catholic marriages, but it's still very high for someone who signs an agreement or agrees to vows of honor and loyalty, love, to cherish till death do they part. How that ends up being, I am a divorced man now, and it wasn't by choice. It wasn't. We had a death and our child died, and I think that just kind of hurts the family. And we weren't Catholic as a husband and wife, so I made the comment to Eddie this morning about something, that my mom was not a good dad, but she's better than the one I had. And I'm not really putting down my dad in the way that you would think that, I loved my father. He didn't really know how to be a dad, I don't think, especially to 7 kids. He always said, it was your mom that wanted all you children. and when you hear that from your father, wow. It's like, okay, which one did he not want? So my dad said stupid things. He was an alcoholic and other things. So, but my mom was as good a father as the one I didn't have, as she could possibly be. She loved me. She was stern, but it was hard on her. And so I actually saw a video clip this morning about how in nature they are what we should be today. This gorilla mother and her young gorilla child, very small but big enough to toddler, was being unruly, and the mother gorilla was trying to get the baby gorilla to behave, and this child just kept acting like a child, jumping around, rolling over, and ignoring mom. And then mom steps aside, and here comes father, and the gorilla baby just straightened right up. and the father didn't do anything. He just, with all his big muscles and everything like that, just stood over the child and looked at him like, you better behave or else. And I thought, if nature has figured it out, then why haven't we? Why have we become so enlightened that we have to go down these different paths and screw up our own kids? Because that's not nature.
No, it isn't. I think what you said about, and we talked about it on the show a little bit, that a mother taking the role of a father is, and I think we acknowledge this as well, single mothers have done phenomenal things. But that does not mean that somehow that is normal. That is
the best way.
That it's certainly not the best way. And so a lot of those single mothers would admit that they were just doing whatever they could. And as that instinct kicks in, they are capable of raising great children. However, as we were saying, the division of labor is not anywhere near equal. They end up with this incredible burden. And so they can only teach the children so much, obviously, and then they run out of steam, or they realize, boy, I've got to worry about all these other children. It's like some of these mothers, they have 4 or 5 kids, and they're on their own. And without the presence of the father, rather than say, hey, all these things are going to work out, it's better to say, okay, what are the children missing? How is the structure, or how is the foundation cracked as a result of this? And I think more and more divorce occurs, and I've seen this since I was a little kid, humans tend to not only justify it, but say it's all the same. And so what happens is the kids and the impact on the kids almost gets dismissed. So then the parents, they basically get to justify such an action. Not in all cases, of course, but I've heard that be justified. And then as a result, you kind of say things like, well, kids are resilient and it will all work out. Kids are resilient. Of course kids are resilient. Humans are resilient. That in no way means...
Because they're living, breathing, they're resilient. They'll get up the next day.
But that in no way implies... It's almost like they're inferring that because kids are resilient, my actions, whatever they may be, have no consequence, and they are perpetually justified. And I think, not you tell me, this might be going off a tangent quite a bit.
Just so you know, he's from an intact family.
Yeah,
mom and dad are still married. He's married. He's still married and have children. So yes.
I'm very
You're not from a divorced situation.
True, but I'm very well aware. I've observed many families that, and just because we're currently married doesn't mean we don't have to actively work on our lives every day and figure out what we don't want for the children and the commitment that is required. My thing that always it always got me that no, I understand. There are situations that are beyond my comprehension with marriages. But when the phrase gets thrown out, kids are resilient, that becomes just, again, and it's north of 50, it's like 50, between 55 and 60%, I believe.
Is divorce rate?
Yeah.
Of all marriages?
Yeah, of all marriages. And yes,
it's a little lower in the Catholic Church.
A little low, yeah.
It's a little lower.
It's not a good witness to the sacrament of matrimony, that's for sure. But I was going to say, if you go beyond just the man and woman, and you even look at the church, there is, I wouldn't even say beginning with the Reformation, but this idea that you can separate yourself and be your own. That's a big part of the discussion. I want to be my own. I want to have my own voice. I don't want to be beholden to anyone. That is part of the aftermath, I believe, long aftermath of things like the Reformation, where that was a major divorce of sorts.
Yeah.
And I would never, I know it's very complicated, but I would say that what you see in modern day, where you can just walk away from things, we're not just talking about marriage, just drop things in an instant because you're not being met where you are or whatever, that is a scary precedent.
Well, and just to point of fact, I'm from I'm a product. I'm one of 7 kids from
Yeah.
a divorced family that my marriage ended in divorce. Again, different circumstances, but I did not bring into that marriage my Catholic faith. I had already I'd left the church shortly before I'd gotten married because she was Southern Baptist and I was Catholic, and the Catholic Church down where I was living at the time was very, very liberal. And I even had I had a problem with it before I even got married. I was having a problem with the things that they were doing and saying. Certain people would get up and blast the bishops for not letting women be priests and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
And they would do that during the Lord, hear our prayers, the intentions. And I could never say, Lord, hear my prayer on this, because I didn't agree with it. So I'm sitting there going, and back in the 80s, I'm much older. I mean, you weren't even born yet, I don't think, yet.
In the 80s?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So anyway, the old adage, the way California goes, so goes the rest of the country. And so I kind of believed that was the case. And I thought, here's what's happening in California. I'm from Idaho, very grown up in a very conservative, traditional Catholic format. Yeah. Sacraments, family, marriage, everything was the mass was good. It was none of these wacko, women should be priests mentions and the intentions and stuff. And yet, so I'm hearing this down there and I'm thinking, oh, California is leading the way again. And any other Christian church that didn't talk about gay marriage or didn't talk about women being priests and stuff was a more conservative, better way to go. So I had no problem walking away from the church because I thought the church was going to become more like the Reformation, where anything goes.
Sure.
And look at where things have gone since the Reformation. We don't have one Christian unity church. We have 50,000 Christian churches and the Catholic Church, or maybe it's 33,000, whatever. There's new churches splitting off all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to even keep track of them where they're at. But that's not resiliency. That right there shows resiliency does not exist. You're resilient because you live, you breathe, everyone wants to live. But I'm a product of that so-called resiliency. It messed me up for many, many years, and I'm still trying to put back together the pieces.
That makes sense.
That destroyed a lot of where I would have been in my own personal marriage, my own personal life, because of what took place back then.
Yeah.
This is my show. This is our show, my podcast. I will say that my lack of understanding of loving women and loving a true understanding of love or being loved came from the fact that my dad didn't want all these children. The fact that my dad was not around to show me that strength of a male role in
Sure.
my family.
Yeah.
And yes, I understood the love from my mother, but you got to understand the love from a man as well, the father. And when you don't get that, your understanding of love is sexual in nature and not the intimacy of duty.
Well, you're getting half of the equation.
Right.
And when you're talking about resilience, and I think you're absolutely right. So what does that even mean? If you just say, oh, that person's resilient. Well, what did they exhibit after the fact that leads you to believe that they're resilient? Well, they're still productive. Okay. Well, like what
They got up and put their clothes on.
Yeah. In other words, what is the definition of it? Because there are many very dysfunctional, very unhealthy relationships. And that does not mean there's so much work to be done that it's you just can't group it all together and somehow say, well, because someone has a steady job, let's say, that they're all right. We say that a lot. Yeah. I used to say, oh, great, everything's great. Yeah. Everyone's doing all right.
They're resilient, but why do we have more mass shootings from young people or young people suicides? Why are we having all these issues? Because 9 times out of 10, you will not find a father in the home.
Exactly. But then this is a whole different discussion. Let's blame whatever the person used as they are acting out from a tremendous void in their lives, rather than talk about the root of that void. But let's say that they act out, okay, what did they use when they acted out, right?
When you're talking about use drugs,
alcohol, drugs, whatever. Right. That's part of the equation, is what someone is using, of course, and overusing. But they've looked at what is the constant in these stories. Can you isolate a specific issue? And like you said, was it 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times? These boys are lacking a father.
The structure of a father.
The structure, yeah. And so anyway, back to my point about being resilient, I think that we should talk more about, okay, what is a healthy relationship? And I know that Salt and Light, and they've had interviews with, I forget his name, where he talks about what does a healthy relationship look like? And then you can talk about, okay, you're resilient. Now you're taking steps, like you just said, to heal from this, but there's healing. If you avoid that conversation and say that somehow the kids are going to be all right without discussing the need for healing from trauma and the need from healing from abandonment and all these other issues, then you're just kidding. You're kidding yourselves, and you're probably contributing to the perpetuation of such a thing, rather than saying we need to work on this so that this next generation is not going to feel the exact same way.
Divorce laws have changed. Once it became easier to get a divorce, it escalated. Divorces went up through the roof because it's like you can, right to work state, you can fire anyone for any reason, for any reason at all. You don't have to explain yourself. If they're stealing from you or whatever, you can fire them. You don't have to give a cause. So in a divorce, it was kind of like that same thing. Oh, I'm just tired of her. I want to get a new babe on the side. And so children are not resilient because they're put in situations where they don't even understand the situation in which they're put into. Like for me, when my parents divorced, my mom knew she needed the support of her family back home in Idaho, so we left Southern California, the LA area, for Twin Falls, where we were going to spend time with more of her siblings, more of her family, because she knew as a single mom raising 7 kids, she needed more family support. So, but I was angry at that move because my friends, my baseball team, all that stuff was back there, and I was angry. And so that's not resilience when you're angry and lashing out, causing problems. But I look back now, I actually knew much earlier in my life that it was a good thing we moved out of Southern California, because without a father in the home, even then, if the divorce courts had said you have to stay in Southern California to be closer to the father, I probably would have been in jail or dead, because the group of friends that I had, because of the dysfunction of my family life at home, I was hanging out with kids that were shoplifting and being vandalistic and stealing. And so that issue, when my parents in the early 70s, she was allowed to move the kids to where she could get support, move us to Twin Falls, to Idaho. I had the problem with our move, but here's where resiliency does come in. I knew I didn't have a choice. And I knew my dad didn't want me home at his home to be raised by him.
Sure.
So I think he let us go because he didn't have to worry about it. I don't know what his thinking was at the time, but I know he felt he was better off.
Yeah.
So when you know that about your own upbringing, I know that I got put into a better crowd of kids because they weren't the same group of kids there. And I probably could have found them, but your life is, when it's changed like that, you tend to either become more reclusive, or you find that you become a loner, which really I was a loner. I'm the middle child of 7, and there's a big gap between my older brother and me, and I was both the youngest of that group of four and the oldest of the other group of four.
Yeah.
I was the leader, the head. I had to grow up fast. So, I became responsible for some things.
Well, I heard this, and I think we spoke about it. This is probably months ago, where many marriages, they find themselves, because of changing circumstances, they find that their marriage is a very real cross. In other words, not perpetually, but they find these seasons where they're walking with this incredibly heavy cross. They can't see eye to eye. You have a sick child, disabled child, someone in the family passes away. There's so many different things that cause those moments, those seasons where there's just this unbearable cross. But what happens, again, I don't know which psychologist said this. They said, very Catholic psychologist, you take your cross, you have an opportunity to shoulder your cross. But through divorce, you don't realize you're taking the cross off of yourself and you're placing it on your children.
Ah.
And the children, they may not realize, I now have my parents' cross, right?
But in reality, that's what happens.
But what happens is, and then you can't just say, there's no trauma here. Nothing to see here. That didn't affect me at all. I'm great. I'm happy. You have to, and I think he mentioned this as well, you have to be able to say that. This is real. This is very difficult. I, as a child, or in your case, I have a cross, and I have to work through that.
Right.
Now, of course, you have a choice, too. You can embrace that cross, or you can obviously dump it on someone else. And so this relates to any type of relationship. And back to my point about the church. There might be someone that is suffering for the sake of the church and has that very real decision to say, you know what, I can't shoulder this anymore. I'm going to dump it. And that could be the form of a church split. Mm-hmm. So, like you were saying, it's hard to keep track of. There are people that are suffering that are outside of Catholic communion, and even they I guess they don't realize what they're doing. There might be some period of suffering in their own church, and they just say, you know what, I'm going to go forge my own path. Dump that cross.
Right.
Dump it, and then just keep.
It's almost easier to dump the cross than to. So years ago, back in the early 80s, and this is what was very difficult for me to face what I perceived as happening. Mm-hmm. And what's really sad is this was at the onset of Pope Saint Pope John Paul II's reign as Pope. Mm-hmm. Early on, he came in 78.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that guy. So I missed the best years of probably one of the best popes we've ever had as far as being in communion with the Catholic Church, because I was blinded by my lack of understanding, lack of knowledge of my faith of the church, but also confused by where it was going. And I didn't know who to turn to find out, is this what's happening, or is this just this priest that is doing this? And in reality, it was just that priest or two that I had dealt with that kind of led that path for me to leave the church because of their votes. But in 82, when I was at a very low point in my life, the week before Holy Week during Lent, a brother from Mount Angel in Oregon came down and did a mission talk, and my mom insisted I go, and we go as a family. We went almost every night. And one of the messages he brought up was the cross is a burden. The cross was the burden of the sins of the world. Mm-hmm. But Christ wants you to, what does he say? Pick up your cross and
deny yourself.
Deny yourself and follow me.
Yeah.
He goes, when are we going to stop placing all the burdens of our lives on someone else's cross? When are we going to pick up our own cross and be responsible for our own burdens? Now, if I hadn't heard that, I probably wouldn't be resilient today, because that meant more to me than the so-called psychologist saying, children are resilient, they'll get over the divorce. No, I've never gotten over the divorce. Be honest with you. I've never gotten over my parents' divorce, and I'll probably never get over my own divorce, because I felt helpless in stopping my divorce from happening.
Mm-hmm.
It took 8 years of separation for us to finally get divorced, but it's because I didn't want it. Okay, I did not want that divorce. I tried to reconcile. I tried everything I could. She was so hurt by the loss of I don't know. She's never really told me. I can only assume that the loss of our son and the challenges that we faced because we didn't work on it together. We didn't work on saving the marriage. We became individualistic in our burdens and our grief that we never tried to fix the marriage as a couple that wanted to stay together.
Sure.
So when we finally, after 8 years of separation, which is it's almost 10 years after my son died, that our marriage finally ended in separation.
Sure.
And then 8 years after that ended in divorce.
Yeah.
When I tried to reconcile, all she could say was, I don't want to go back to the way it was. Now, I still don't know what that means. Yes, were there tough times? Yes. I mean, I'm self-employed. I had a business. It did well, then it did poorly. It did well, it did poorly.
Yeah.
It's what life is like being self-employed.
What I realized is no matter what your upbringing was or wasn't, or mine was or wasn't, if you want to justify divorce,
that's exactly right.
You sure can.
You sure can.
You don't need to come with a ton of baggage. You could just say, you know what, I want to go explore, and I'm out of here. That's the other thing that becomes so easy, because it's not just one person that can play the victim. Everyone can play a victim at any point, at any time. It's very simple to play the victim. You can get offended at a moment's notice. You can be unforgiving at a moment's notice. These are not profound statements. This is just reality.
Reality of life.
That a lot of the divorces that do occur, you do wonder how many people will just hang on to something, whatever that is, and
to justify their reasoning for divorce.
Correct. And if it's kind of the same with when you are steeped in any type of sin, I'm going to hold this. I'm going to take this to the grave. I mean, I actually had those thoughts, and I would imagine a lot of people have those same thoughts with, I guess it's pride, stubbornness. I'm going to hold on to this until the day I die, and you can't do anything about it, that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of like a final statement that when you read about divorce, you see comments like that. And in fact, when celebrities, let's say, are profiled about their it's tell-all, right? You see these on newsstands still to this day. And there'll always be that moment where they say, I finally found myself, or something to that effect. So combined with maybe that stubbornness that no one is really going to actively talk about, because if they recognize that, maybe they're going to go work on it. But there's always that element of, I'm going to keep this, and then I found myself. Or someone said, whatever makes you happy, you need to pursue what you think is right. And so in that element, this is also lost. One flesh doesn't mean a darn thing. Because with the one flesh, the reality of the sacrament of matrimony, it is supposed to be, you're not making statements like, I found myself, I need to find myself. You need to be together and figure out how life works together, because you have one beating heart. Yeah. And that is something that is learned. You don't just flip on a switch and say, oh, I get it all. It takes a lot of time. It says,
let no man tear us under. And what's happened is we've allowed that one man or that secular world. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be just the world out there that is constantly in your face on TV and the radio saying, you need to be happy. You need to get rid of that guy or that woman to be happy, to be fulfilled, and to find yourself. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that we don't do enough premarital training, education. We don't have our young couples I still think some parishes do this, but 6 to 8 weeks of training with a couple that's been married for 30, 40, 50 years is probably a good way to spend some evenings with them and let them enlighten you with how they, after 30, 40, 50 years, are still married. I met a couple that just the other day that married 74 years. And I'm going, what'd they do, get married at 2? You know? I mean, even if they got married at 18, to survive 74 years of all the changes, they had to have done something within their marriage that told them they would never give up. And that I applaud. That is so beautiful, because to them, they took their vows seriously. Mm-hmm. When they may have been young, they may have been too young to have gotten married in our eyes and our standards today. But when they took those vows, words mean something.
Yeah.
They understood what those words meant that they were agreeing to.
Yeah.
And I think we've changed the lexicon of conversation so drastically that words they're evolving, and that's not true. But we're making them evolve to where people are confused to the point where they don't even know what gender they are.
Yeah. I want something you said a second ago, I wanted to go back to as well. So people will leave each other and leave churches and leave families, and they will, what we were saying, they'll make those statements about, I want to be happy, or there's this element of, hey,
I want to be more reverent, or I want to
find myself, I want to find satisfaction, as saint after saint after saint has said. Whether that's marriage, related to finding the right church, related to how you relate to your parents, if you are apart from God, bond with God, relationship with God, you are chasing your tail. Saint after saint after saint. I'm paraphrasing. None of them said they're chasing their tail. But the point is, whether you drop alcohol and go after gluttony, drop gluttony, go after pornography, drop pornography, go after
fulfilling one satisfied,
or going after something that is just loaded with pride, whatever it is.
You know, you can even have pride in your own religion or your own faith.
Absolutely. So all of that stuff, whatever it is, you're not, when you say you're chasing happiness, unless we are, all of us, getting on our knees and praying, we're not going to find satisfaction. You and I have talked about that. You drop one thing, you go to another thing. If you cannot detach.
Well, I hope when I dropped one thing, I came to something that was the better thing.
Sure.
And what I'm doing now.
Sure.
And let me give you an example.
Yeah.
When my marriage was I knew my marriage was over long before it really was.
Yeah.
Because of just how cold it was in the home. No matter what I did, I couldn't do anything to fix it. And I did try to fix it, which may have been the problem in the first place. I tried to fix it. And I did it through, but again, that goes to show you that I didn't know the proper way to love a woman, my wife, because I didn't have that in my own life. And I came about it much more after the fact, because I returned to the church and I learned some things. But so when I was unsatisfactory in my marriage, I sought to politics as a means to, and pornography.
Sure.
You know, the internet's so easy to find stuff with. I always claimed I never paid for a dirty magazine. I never bought Hustler or Playboy but yet how are you into pornography? Well, it's on the internet. It's free. You put in chocolate and it comes up something else. So it's easy to get on to pornography. It's so accessible now, and it's free of charge. A lot of it is, until it's no longer free in your heart or your soul.
Sure.
And how you look at things. But so I went to politics, and I got into talk shows, and I would listen to it, and I still listen to it because I still think we need to be informed. But it drove me, and what it did was drove me into an anger, to an issue of angry at this person or that person.
Got it. Or politically, you're saying.
Yeah, politically, yes. So I was consumed by it. But what it did was it took me away from Calgon, take me away. It's that old, I need something to take me away from my day's mess. And so politics became that. And I became in your face, this is right. I'm going to prove to you you're right. I'm going to talk you into being right because this is where it is. And yes, there are some morally right ways of politics, and there's some immoral ways, and there are some right ways and everything.
But that became like a religion.
But that became like a religion to me. And I wasn't in a Catholic church at that time. And it's the Catholic Church that saved my soul. Okay, it saved my life. It saved my soul. It helped me to be happy. So here's what happened. When my wife left me, we were on the financial brink of financial ruin, personally, professionally, business, all my net worth. I mean, I went from a net worth of $10 million to basically not even able to scratch 2 nickels together and provide food. It was getting rough, and again, part of my anger didn't allow me to see ways to solve the problems.
Got it.
So that was what also drove me into anger, because it gave me an outlet to vent my disappointment and my failures. Okay, so here I am talking politics. I'm getting angry. I'm in other people's faces. I had to be right about everything, and I lost. So in the brink of losing my farm, we're forced into foreclosure on the farm and most of my assets. And my wife decides to leave me. And my youngest child is graduating. So I was losing my whole world. Everything I worked hard for, everything I provided duty and service and everything. Yeah. I was losing everything. Now, there was 5 acres adjacent to the 75 acres I owned. So I can literally look at all. I built greenhouses. I built a vineyard. I put a lot of money into this property, 75 acres, and I'm still living on the 5 acres. So this is where God has come in and provided me sanctuary and love and mercy. I live every day now looking at that 75 acres I lost. The greenhouses are still there. The vineyards are gone. It's now farmable ground for the dairy across the street. But the greenhouses that I built are still there. Yeah. And for a couple of years, I was angry and bitter.
Because I'm looking at
it. Yeah. But it wasn't until I returned to the Catholic Church and I went to that first men's conference where Travis Wingo, a couple of episodes ago, he and I had a conversation about that's what got me started into my reformation of my own body and soul and filled with the Holy Spirit, to where now I'm doing this men's ministry. I've always wanted to do a podcast because I thought what we had was pertinent, not for my own glorification or my own self-worth. It was because I had screwed up so much. I had made so many mistakes by leaving the church in the first place. Yeah. I think that my marriage would still be together if I had stayed on principle, even though my wife wasn't going to become Catholic. If I had stayed true to the church and gone to Mass and led by example, could I have led them? I will never know. Could I have led them to the church? Who knows? Would my kids have been baptized into the church? I don't know. Would they be Catholic today? I don't know, because I didn't stick to what I was raised. I didn't stick to the principles that I believed in, because I've always believed in the Eucharist and the Mass and the liturgy. I always was a Catholic. I just wasn't going to church.
And just like I said about marriage, you, for the rest of your life, could easily, and anyone could say, hey, I left because of so-and-so. I hear that a lot when I interview people. And
I left because I was ignorant.
Exactly.
I was ignorant.
So if we can get to that point, I left because I was completely ignorant as well, right? What good would it do to go back and find the culprit or name the culprit as to why you left something, why you left the church? That comes up a lot.
It helps you to understand where you were mind-wise and heart-wise as to why or how you left the church. I don't blame that priest. I blame me for not questioning that priest.
It's very easy.
But I did blame the priest for a long time.
Of course. I'm not saying it doesn't. Yeah. I'm saying hopefully.
But it did me no good. It didn't make me solve my problem.
Hopefully you get to a point where you realize if I just blame that person, again, with the precedent, you could go anywhere and blame anyone And that's what I believe. That's how we get to a point when I talk about the Catholic Church and people say, I don't need church. You get to a point where what was broad, what was a community, what was global becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. You have people saying, I don't need four walls. It's a relationship with Jesus. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Man Cave, a weekly podcast discussing the issues that affect Catholic men in today's culture. A production of Salt and Light Radio in Boise, Idaho. To learn more about our ministry, please visit our website, saltandlightradio.com.